Couple of disclaimers real quick. One, this is a single person's take on a very complex thing. And two, parts of this video have already aged within the 5 days that I started making it. So, I knew this was going to age anyways, but I didn't expect it to age before it even made it out the door. Oh well. Well, hello there. You're probably wondering different things at the moment. You want to know what's going on with all this noise these days. Chances are you forgot about it, or ran out of thoughts to have, or maybe something else. And that's all fine and normal. Activity was gonna die down eventually. There are a couple problems, though. For one, those of us left who are still interested aren't exactly communicating very well. It's like one of those Minecraft land plot servers. We're each building and rebuilding in our own little designated sandboxes. The second issue is when I see neurotyping out in the wild from people not in the community, their understandings are very outdated and superficial. But whose fault is that really? The original neurotyping videos are still the only majorly visible doctrine on the subject. Me and my colleagues really haven't done anything to rectify that. And it's safe to say a lot has changed since this whole thing started. So to transition you into the current era, I thought, you know what? Why don't I do something to help kick the dust off a little bit? My name is Urkoi, and this is my best current dry explanation of the neurotyping system. Now, I will try to keep this brief and understandable, but this is going to be an example of what a personal model looks like. This doesn't have any input from anyone else, so that is important to bear in mind. Let's start broadly. What is neurotyping? If you only had one sentence to contextualize this typological nightmare in an awkwardly small elevator, what would it be? Maybe something like, well, it's a system of categorizing people according to how their brain works. Or, like MBTI, except not complete dog shit. Or, my favorite extended Discord E-family. These are okay, but they aren't nearly specific enough for what we're after today. If I only had one sentence to describe this thing, here's what I've come up with. Neurotyping is a typology that measures a series of cognitive filters, set differently from person to person. Or to put it a slightly different way,
what is a man? A miserable little pile of
cognitive filters. If you imagine your mind is a prism, light coming in is information which then gets distorted through that prism. The shape of the prism is your neurotype. It's the amalgamation of those filters that bend the light in a particular way. This will be the basis through which we'll be looking at each of the four axes. Yes, you heard that correctly. When we're looking at an axis, it'll have a subject and then a filter, which scales toward one end of that axis.
But enough talk! How about you?
The x-axis measures granularity of thought. The size of these grains determine how much thoughts are compressed, based on their most salient elements. If you're familiar with the original videos on the system, you'll remember that a trait often associated with Impressionism is having a difficult time conveying ideas. Words just don't seem to be enough. So you either need a lot of time and vocabulary, or you give up and hope for the best in the other party to pick up the slack in the understanding. By contrast, it seems that lexical folks don't have any issue in getting across the content of their idea. Almost like the words and the content are one and the same, or at least very tightly knit. I believe this is because to be lexical is to have a brain that places the content you're interacting with into larger regions, or grains, not in the sense of deliberate categorization, but rather as a muscle that flags superfluous information as redundant. This reduces ideas to their most important parts, while the specific qualia goes ignored until either arrived at by necessity or deliberate examination. And this is why they tend to be so fast when fetching descriptions. Their mind is already clear of that minutia. This can, of course, lead to a particular flavor of blockheadedness at times, wherein one refuses to dissolve the regions their brain has given them despite any amount of friction caused as a result. This is the x-axis filter turned all the way up. I like to think of it as quantized. Impressionism, then, can be thought of as continuous. This extreme has no regions to divide thoughts, as each one is left as wholly distinct, stacked beside the rest in one large texture map. This makes conveying thoughts as is nigh impossible, as there's just too much to sort through. Now, either end can communicate however they'd like, obviously. This has to do with skill, pretty much. But hopefully this solidifies the why behind gravitating one direction or another. The y-axis measures structure of thought. The more structure, the more thoughts will branch directly off from one another. Laterality has often been filled with problematic assumptions from the beginning, and pinning down exactly what it is has been equally painful. One thing that seems to permeate different takes on it, though, is the cloud of thought that was outlined in the inception, as if every idea is in contact with or connecting with every other idea indiscriminately. Many times when people from both sides interact with one another, the latter will have a difficult time constructing a digestible idea without severing connections they've already made to other ideas, and in the process of trying to say everything, they might end up saying nothing. What hasn't often been detailed, though, is what their counterparts are up to. Nobody actually knows how Linear's thoughts are structured beyond some basic stereotypes. From what I've been able to glean, it seems like the Linear is holding on to a central topic at hand at any given moment, with possible peripheral topics as doorways to be navigated through. You'd usually be hard-pressed to lose the what of their idea as they're communicating it. However, this doesn't mean they're thinking one thing at a time like was first posited. Rather, it's because they have a natural sense of a main idea that they will quickly feel when the plot is being lost. I believe that wherever someone is on this axis, it will describe their mental floor plan. One either has a floor plan with many rooms guiding what topics connect to one another, or the floor plan will be completely open like a warehouse, with every topic sharing the same air and being wheeled around the different corners. Compared to the other axes, this is pretty much pure speculation on my part at this point. I'm not really confident that branching structure is what linearity is, but I'm fairly confident that structure, in general, is what the y-axis is measuring. The z-axis measures the projection of ideas across time, based on the ratio of immediate steps considered versus expected outcomes. Something emphasized early on was how people or characters of the same neurotype will still differ from one another in other ways. The two given examples were a person's IQ and their temperament. While temperament was primarily focused on emotional reactivity, it inspired early ideas of another primary axis that could be implemented, also colloquially referred to as Lane and Yui types inspired by the characters, and now most recently branded as extemporal and prospective thinking. Extemporal thinkers are primarily focused on what is most relevant to the current moment, and step through simulations of what's next in progressive series. If it doesn't connect back in some way to the issue at hand, it's either quickly dismissed or hasn't even crossed their mind to begin with. Their way of imagining the future is in the name, extemporal. Anything pondered is treated as the way it might happen in that moment. Time happens to them, and they are either its victim or its challenger. It is not considered to be a fabric that can be directly manipulated. Prospective thinkers would disagree, or in any case, act like the future is readily malleable. These individuals often consider as little as possible for what's right in front of them. They instead search possibility space for likely scenarios compared against their current situation and choose the most favorable. These types tend to view different paths holistically, treating all steps along a given path as one summarized thread, and use this comparing of threads for either avoiding conflicts or wasted investments. The irony, of course, is this often leads to freezing or decision paralysis. It can block favored outcomes from coming to fruition as much as the unfavored ones, and can waste just as much time on scanning diverging paths as an extemporal might on failed prospects. Finally, the W-axis, because we ran out of letters, measures conceptual framework stability over time. The higher the stability, the more resilience to new data those frameworks have. Stubbornness was often ascribed as part of linear or lexical stereotypes, inevitably stacking together in an ultimate form as the bookkeeper. Now, obviously, that's not true for those types in all cases. But what did seem to be the case was that not all impressionists or lexicals were operating the same way as their neighbors. The y-axis was accounted for, and the z-axis too was understood in an early form. And yet, elusive outliers still appeared. Lexicals difficult to pin down for their incongruency or unusual fluidity. Impressionists more stable and unflinching than expected. Sometime later, the idea of a flexibility axis was proposed and readily dismissed, as it seemed to have a baked-in negative bias. This, however, was picked up and refurbished by yours truly, along with the ideas of the z-axis, to create Neurotyping 2, an April Fool's joke that makes a nice supplement to the original axes. In rethinking flexibility, I imagined potential negatives and positives for both, and ended up with the more neutral stationary and protean. Those highly stationary can of course manifest as the immovable object, only adjusting their frameworks in abrupt steps after mounting evidence or thorough convincing forces the issue. But they can also be a great source of resolve and clear groundwork, as they prefer only to build with as legible pieces as possible. Protean folks instead are often taken by a ride by information they encounter. They might hold contradictory ideas in their mind at the same time, orbiting each other endlessly. I like to joke that the Protean is the type of person who has a new ideology every week. Because of their tendency to so closely follow incoming data, they usually have to wait for it to build into distinct peaks to have any solid ground to stand on. This fluidity, though, tends to make them more adaptable, and can also be an advantage in revealing new insights faster. Now, I said at the start that each axis was a filter, so I should quickly lay out what each one is filtering out. As explained before, the x-axis filters out superfluous detail of thoughts. The y-axis filters out indiscriminate connections between thoughts. The z-axis filters out unwanted steps in progression of thoughts. And the w-axis filters out excessive reframing or reshuffling of thoughts. And that, in a nutshell, is my best current explanation of neurotyping. Now, I really gotta emphasize, this is only my take. It's not meant to be a capstone to anything. It's still pretty sloppy and might be straight up wrong, but I'm hoping it gives you an idea of the kind of specificity we've been missing out on, and maybe this can help shake the dust off a little bit and inspire things to get moving more than they have. Speaking of which, if this piqued your interest and you want to be involved in something, there's been a stirring to start trying some things we've never tried before. We've done plenty of theorycraft over these 4 years, but putting it into practice is something we haven't seen yet. A little field testing, maybe? Join the neurochord, perhaps. Ask questions, get more than just this perspective, and see what you might want to get involved in. If that's not really your speed and you want a small hangout spot for general talk, join the Neurotypeline Discord. Both of these are in the description, though if there's going to be any action happening, it's probably going to be the neurochord. Anyway, that's all I've got. I've been Urkoi. Go to my website and listen to my music. I love you this much, and have a nice day.